Well, I want to welcome everyone to our continuing education series on Acumatica. Today's session is going to be on Acumatica security and setting it up and making sure that you know what to be doing in the system. We've got a wide range of different clients here today, so people that are not implemented to people that are been on the system for a while, and I think this will be a great education for everyone. Today's presentation will being done by Jason Schwartz. Jason is one of our consultants here at Net@Work and been working on a lot in terms of security, forms, reports, creating dashboards, generic inquiries, and things like that. So we're excited to have Jason go over security today. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to him. This is about a 30-minute presentation and hope to make it very educational. So Jason, all yours.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in today as we cover the security training. As always, with our webinars, everyone's going to be in mute-only mode. All lines are muted, but if you have any questions, don't hesitate. Type them off to the right. Stuart's going to be monitoring that, and I'd love to get those answered through a couple stopping points for questions as we go through the presentation. So today we're going to cover 4 different aspects in Acumatica. The first would be security preferences, which needs to be enabled, which we would cover the password policy, the 2-factor authentication, lockout, et cetera, which we'll cover in just a second when we get into the demo. Users, which is determining their roles, their passwords, logging in, tracking their location, seeing even filtering where they can have access to Acumatica so they're not able to access it at a local Starbucks or a public Wi-Fi at the airport for security purposes. Default home pages when they're jumping into Acumatica. Access rights is how you can monitor and change who has access to this screen and not have access to this screen throughout the system. And then the access history, which is where we will cover kind of how users are navigating through the system and actually doing the work that they should be doing rather than just sitting on a screen, and Acumatica gives you all that great information. So after we've logged in to Acumatica, you'll be dropped in on this main homepage. This is going to have the first homepage dashboard, which I'll show you how you can set their homepage in just a second. But we're going to navigate off to the left here, and if you scroll down, you'll see it says More Items, and then you'll see a User Security tab right here. We're going to go ahead and click on that, and then this is where we'll have access to all the different things we'll be covering in today's broadcast. So we're going to be covering first, which is the security preferences, which is off to the right. And the way to think about security preferences is this is kind of the default general overview of the policies that you want all users to kind of follow by. So at the top, we can see here we have the password policies of how often a user will have to change his password, how long the password has to be, and even the complexity requirements, which is adding those characters, the shift over 2 for the @ sign, or the explanation point over 1, and even alerts. So you can say if somebody's putting in the wrong password, what will display when they type that password incorrectly. The next thing I wanted to discuss, which was brought in relatively recent, and it's now big in 2020 R1 and brought in 2019 R2, which is 2-factor authentication. And I can't stress this enough. It's actually one of my favorite features in Acumatica, because not only is somebody able to log in normally, but they're having a second layer of protection. And it's so crucial with how much data is on the system that you really need to make sure that the right eyes are logging into these accounts. And this will allow you to have, after the user is logged in, to be prompted by either an email, a text message, and even the authentication app to say, hey, is this you? And give you a temporary code to type in, as you've seen probably on Microsoft 365 or maybe on Gmail. And you can enable that right here, and you also have to enable it on 2020 R1 in the on the enable disable features. So I'll show you that now. If you type in enable disable features at the top, and you'll see at the bottom in 2020 R1 that they added a new section down below, which is called advanced authentication. And then here you can choose to enable it, and using Google and Microsoft SSO, And these are really important. You make sure this is checked if you're going to enable this, so you can use the Microsoft or the Google app in the App Store or the Google Play Store, and then users can download that and then add that authentication layer on top of their accounts. Now, just enabling here enables it for all the users, but you can even go in and choose, maybe you want some users that don't have access to very secure data. You don't need them to have that type of security because it is a paid add-on of security. So you can kind of go about navigating that, which we'll see in just a minute. You also see we have the lockout after, which essentially says that if somebody logged in 3 times with the wrong password, it's going to lock their account. And we can choose how many minutes they have to wait before they log back in, and even the reset, how long it will take before that lockout counter will reset. So this is all customizable. Obviously, you want to have the lowest possible, because that allows, you're just making sure that that person has to get the password right. And obviously, we all make mistakes, but the more attempts you give that person, if they're not the right person, can kind of log into the system, that's giving them more chances and more kind of checking off the boxes of this is not the right password. So definitely by default, it will stay at 3, 15, and 10, but something to look into. Below that, off to the right, you can see we have the menu editor role in the modern UI. That gives you the ability to actually move where these are showing up, what the names are throughout these modules in Acumatica. And right now it's set to the administrator role. If you want to set a specific role for somebody else to be managing that, this is where you would go about doing so. Below we have auditing and kind of how long you're going to keep this, the history for. So you can see we can choose to keep the history for login failed, log out. There's a lot of different pieces of information. Acumatica is monitoring every little thing and every action, so you can really come back and make sure if you're see a question down, say 2 months, 2 months down the road, you notice something, someone's logging in a lot and getting incorrect password attempts, you realize somebody's been doing this, somebody's trying to log into their account, it's not the right person, you can then go in and start figuring out where that's happening. And then below here this is how you enable the allowed dual factor authentication. And this is where you allow the different Google or Microsoft or Exchange identity token. Does anybody have any questions here?
Jason, there is one question that came on this page. The question was, how often do you recommend forcing the users to change their password?
I think a good rule of thumb is about either 1 to 2 months, just because, I mean, this data is very, you don't want random people logging into there, and the more times you change a password, the more variation it brings into the equation and makes it harder for people to get in. So I think around 1 to 2 months is a really good rule of thumb to require users to change their password.
Great.
So the next questions. Awesome. So the next stop, as we saw in our slideshow, we're going to head over to the users tab. So we're going to go back to the user security. And what's great about Acumatica is once you're in that module, it would actually, even if it's not in the default area up above, it will stay below. We're going to head over to users, and this is how we take it to a more specific granular level to each role and user in the system. So normally speaking, because I've been playing around with this, it jumps you into admin. Normally you'll see nothing and it'll be blank and it'll show just like this. So you're going to have to go and hit the magnifying glass or F3 if anyone's a keyboard user to bring up the pop-up, and we're going to choose one of the roles here. Now, there's a couple things on the screen I want to point out when going through and creating users and setting up the system. And the first one is user type. So user type is kind of, think of it as a broad scope, a position in the company. So you want to set up a user type as kind of maybe a salesperson or maybe an inventory warehouse worker. This is where you'll set up those presets so you can kind of make a rule of thumb. So see, we have sales employee, and then by clicking this, we'll change the user roles below. And we'll actually touch on that in the next screen of how you can set that up. The linked entity, this is how you would link maybe an employee in the system to the user account. And that's really important to do on the employee screen. So this way, right now in this demo data, I'm Maxwell Baker for this case, but this is how you'll make sure, and you can see here, we have all the different employees in the company, and you link them in for the emails and all that good information of contact information. So if anyone else wanted to say contact Maxwell Baker in this case, they can log into the employees, see what user they have and their email and phone number. We have here comments, so if you want to put a comment maybe about that user, just give some information. And these are all really important throughout Acumatica, the comments, because a lot of people going in and out of managing this, they need to have the information that if people are changing. So we have the ability to put comments here, and as well on Acumatica, there's always a notes tab up here. So always feel free to type information here, because if somebody's fresh looking at it, they can go through here. When they type notes in, you'll see if we type in just test, it will turn to a yellow, and then this way they'll be notified when they're on the screen that, hey, somebody's typed something, let me take a look. And we can also attach some files as well. So below here, you can see we have a bunch of different roles, and the roles, sorry about the refresh. So the roles below here, you want to make sure these are very, very specific. You don't want to give a specific role multiple functions. You want to keep it as granular as possible because this is what makes it, you have the ability to easily add access and remove access from a user. So when going through these different roles, you don't want to have, for example here, if we scroll down to, we have employee, or let's see, it's a good example here, like the report designer. You don't want to give a report designer access to the financials and something else. So this way, if you say, hey, he was having access, you realize he was going around and playing with data that he shouldn't been, and looking in there for multiple times, as we'll see how we can track that. You can't just, it's not easy for a general user to come in here and just uncheck the box, because now he's going to lose his access to his report designer. So you want to give these roles, when you're creating them and adding them throughout the system beyond just the default, you want to just make sure that they're very specific. The description says exactly what they're doing. So this way you're not having to play around with a bunch of different screens, and it's easy to add or remove access. And then just some other examples here. We have branch caps, so you can choose under the roles section here what branches they have access to up here. So you can actually see that the admin role obviously has access to every single branch, but we can remove access maybe to revision 2 capitals and the product side, and we just want that user to have access to services. This is where you'll go about doing that and adding or removing those options. Over here, we can see this is the allowed number of sessions. This is how many times that user can log into Acumatica. So in Acumatica, the best part about it is that you can have tons and tons of windows, access it from a bunch of different computers on one user, which is amazing. But sometimes it's a little bit too much. You don't want to have too many logins at once on one user. So this is where you'd go about changing that. Below, we can see here that we can override the security preferences at the user level here, just specifically for admin. So this is how you can add or remove that 2-factor authentication I was talking about earlier. Statistics will tell us kind of how often the user's been logging in, when they've been logging out. And this is how we can start figuring out if somebody's been logging into that account that shouldn't be, and we can see if there's a lot of failed login attempts here. This is something that, hey, we need to take a look at and just force the user and check this box to force them to change their password. So you don't always actually have to send an email and say, hey, change your password. You can just force them to do it the next time as well. We have IP filter here. This is how you can make sure people aren't logging in at Starbucks or maybe at the airport. You want to make sure that their data, when they're accessing that data, they're not in a public hotspot. It is very easy, especially on these public internet Wi-Fi hotspots, for other people to really fish around and see what data people are downloading. It may not be as simple as just Googling it, but people do know that, and it's very important with this crucial confidential data that other people aren't able to do that. So an IP filter would be a smart idea to enable, so people are only accessing it maybe from their home and their work, or maybe their home work in another home, or maybe a general working in another office. But this is how you'll go about that, and you can go here and say, hey, I want all the salespeople only accessing it from the sales office, and this is where you'll make sure that they only have access through there. External identities, this is where you see the exchange tokens and the dual-factor authentication. Personal settings, this is where you choose your time zone, your home page. So your home page, the home button actually in Acumatica is this icon here. So you can see here it's the customer view with the screen I was looking at when we first jumped into Acumatica. So if you want to change to maybe a specific dashboard or a specific screen, this is how you would change that at a user level. The default branch, this is how you choose when you log into Acumatica for the first time. This is how you tell Acumatica to put that user in only that in that specific branch. Devices, this is where you see all the different applications throughout Acumatica. So if somebody has an iPad, an iPhone, or an Android, all the devices that are using the Acumatica app, this is where you'll see what device they're using, the version of the OS, and that's really crucial as well. Some people don't always update their phones, or maybe have a phone that isn't getting the latest updates on Android. That's something to take into consideration because the OS version may be really out of date. And if it's an older Android version, there's a lot of exploits that have been patched out. And that might be a time to say, hey, we're only going to take maybe iOS 12 in iPhone terms and up, because we don't want anybody below with maybe a not secure, maybe the system has had an exploit that was really big that Apple patched and they haven't updated it, so we can prevent that phone from using the Acumatica app and accessing that data. Location tracking, this is how you enable how to track all of the where the user's going. So say, for example, a inventory worker is making deliveries, and you want to have access to see, is he actually driving the correct route that he was supposed to be doing for his job, or is he just going to Starbucks or doing other things, or not actually taking the deliveries, and he's telling you a different story. This is how you can actually make sure that that employee is doing the job that he was supposed to be doing for that day. And then the final feature that I love about users is right now I'm an admin, which is the user I'm logged in, but say you wanted to see what, in this case, see Bloom, Todd Bloom, is what he has access to when you're changing your user security in Acumatica. You can go ahead and change to his user and actually log in as Todd Bloom. So you can then have two sessions open as the admin and Todd's. So you can see he has what screens he has access to. So if he was saying, hey, I don't have access to maybe the banking module, and you've added that and you realize that, oh, maybe something you set up was wrong, you can log in as him without requiring you to know his password, and he doesn't have to give it to you, so you can make those changes and then log out. Does anybody have any questions before we hop into the next section?
Jason, there is one question that came in. Thank you for always asking that before you go to the next screen. The question was, does the number of sessions refer to the users logging into different tenants or companies?
So it's just that user logging into the system per company.
Cool.
Per tenant, my apologies.
Okay, per tenant, yes. Because a tenant would obviously be, as we've gone in the past, a tenant is a completely separate login with a separate user set up. So you're correct.
So the companies you can see here are these ones, the Revision 2 Capital, the Revision 2 products, and the Revision 2 services, but a tenant is the whole login on the system. So we're going to head back over here to the next section under user security, and we're going to head over to the user roles. So a user role, like I was kind of talking about earlier, these are the users that have access to that specific role that you had access below. So we can see who has access to CA admin, or in this case, let's see who has access to the different branches. So we can see branch cap. So this is every single user that has access to this screen throughout Acumatica. So we can see branch HQ, we have admin, Andrews, A Pulsar. And this way we can see at a more zoomed out level everyone that has access to that screen, and you can then kind of give an overview and switch to the pages below to see, hey, that person actually shouldn't, they just maybe moved from sales to marketing, they shouldn't have access to the sales screen, so you can then remove them out of the system here. And this way you don't have to just go in through their individual users. You can just say, I want to see everyone that has access to this branch. The next one is user types. And user types is what I was referring to when we jumped into the user screen. So this is how you can kind of make more of a, I guess, template for those users. So if you wanted to make a user type for all the sales people in the company, you can say, you can create that new user, add them as the user type to the sales role or the sales type, and then you can add that sales type will bring in all of these individual different roles added in that position. And then from there, you can go in and modify it even further. So this allows you to kind of have a template to bring in the core functionality for that user, and then you can go farther and even edit it there. And then you can even apply it to all the users and overwrite. And then you can see here is another ability to see the users in that type, on that type, and then their login rules as well for all these users. And you can reset password on first login, require login activation, and then even turn on and off the two-factor authentication for this type as well. Does anybody have any questions before we head into the last segment of this webinar?
No questions from the panel, from the group.
Great. So the final thing we're going to go into, which is the access history, and this is how we can see where each user is kind of how they're navigating through Acumatica, how often they're logging in, logging out, and even if you are curious to say kind of how many users are in the system, and say you're going to apply a customization or you wanted to restart the server, this is how you can get an idea about who's using the system and if it's a good time to maybe make some changes. Obviously, it's always good to give a call, but sometimes people don't answer, and this is another way you can see at a different in a different view. So the first thing you'll decide here is username, and if you don't want to choose a username and you want to see all users, it's not a required field. So we're going to go down to the operation, and then the operation. This is how you choose how Acumatica, I guess, separates the data. So you can only see login, log out, or access screen, or all these individual features separately. Unfortunately, you can't see them all together as one, and I think that's mainly because it's very overwhelming with all the different data, and it can get a little confusing. So the best thing to do here is I always go over to the access screen, and then the access screen will see it'll tell us all of the users that are flowing through the system and where they've been and what time they access that screen at. So this is how you can get a gauge is, are people using the system right now? Even if they've logged in, maybe didn't log out, it's possible that the computer's just sitting there. Maybe they locked their computer and didn't log out, and the timeout hasn't hit yet, but it's been 20 minutes depending on how long you've left. You have the timeout counter for. So you can see that information here. And then you can even break it down to a more specific level like admin. So you can see here I was actually playing around with the screens a little bit before this webinar, and you can see where I was accessing, kind of how far, what screen I was going through, and it's endless information. So say you run into, I guess a scenario would be somebody's logging in a lot and you're wondering, why are there a lot of failed password attempts? You can go in here and then go into to the login screen, or say we have, let's go to the login screen, and then you can choose your date. So you can actually filter through the data through a time period. So you can say, okay, when did this start happening? How often were they failing to do their password? And then you can kind of dive in a little bit deeper to get more information out. And then also the final thing we have is we can delete the history if you want to remove that information. I always think the best rule of thumb especially is to keep everything, but they do give you that option up here, and then that's how you go through that. So the final piece I wanted to show for the user security is the access rights throughout Acumatica. So when we're going through access rights in Acumatica to kind of show where people have vision, when you're going through a role and creating a new role in Acumatica, so for example, we're going to go through the administrator. This gives you kind of an overview of what access they have to which screen. So you can see we have the banking module, the compliance module, configuration, contract management, and these are all the little subfolders and sub-screens. So we can expand and even click on the individual folder. So before you start expanding all of the individual folders, and you want to have access to, say, in this case, let's go down to like the anonymous here. Make sure you click on the main folder, because if you add access at a sub-level and they don't have access to the main module, and it's not set, and maybe you say it's revoked, they won't be able to see it. So you make sure that you go to the main folder, then expand, then click on that individual drop down, make sure the access rights are available, then expand, and so on and so forth. And it's always good in Acumatica to open up a new tab, get a visual of what screen and what section they want to be added. And you can use those screens, the visual view, to reference these individual terms of what screens they have access to. And this applies to, you can see we have access by role, we have access rights by user. If you want to go into a specific user in the system, maybe just the admin user or Andrews in this case, you can change that here and give them user security privileges. And we even have screen. So Acumatica gives you 3 different ways to view each individual security preference. And the best part, my favorite part of Acumatica is go to the screen first, see who has access, and see what other users have access, that you're knowing that that person has successfully done that project. Because if they're going in and say, for example, they wanted to create a purchase order or a sales order in this case, they created a sales order and then they moved it over to process a shipment. And when they went to move the sales order and create the shipment, it gave them an error. Chances are the error is because they didn't have access to that screen. And that's why Acumatica is saying, hey, they don't have access to create shipments, they can't do that. So good to kind of find a user that has access to that, go into that screen on this menu here, and then you can view all the different users that have access to that. And you can say, hey, say Bill had access to that and it was working fine for him. Let's see what access rights he has on these screens, and you can go in through here. Well, that's everything I wanted to cover today on security for Acumatica. I'm going to head back over to the slideshow now. And now's your time. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them off to the right.
So the question that just came in was, what's the best way to test security? So, or, what's the best way to set up and test security?
So the best way to set up and test security in Acumatica is to go over to the users and then log in as that user and see and troubleshoot what screens he has access, not access. If you're referring to, I believe the question's asking about like access to different screens, it's easiest to do a visual. I'm a very visual person. I like to get hands-on. So just logging in as that user, having 2 windows open. If you have 2 screens, great. If not, you could cycle between the 2 windows and kind of play around with it. And if you don't have a demo system, please feel free to reach out. I would love to help set up a demo system in your Acumatica install, or maybe you want a local install, whatever it is. But feel free to reach out, because especially with these user roles and maybe testing different functionalities, I always test it in a test system before bringing it to a live environment or a test tenant, because this way if something goes wrong, it's not affecting the production environment.
One other last question that came in is, can we do field level can you do field level auditing?
So field level auditing, the only way to see that would be in the access screen, the access history. Sorry, you say something, Stuart?
Actually, if you go into the sales order module, and actually an easy way of doing this is if you go to the sales order module, or sales order screen, and let's go to sales orders, bring up a sales order. And once you bring up an order, bring up any order in the system, if you go to the security in the upper right-hand corner, that will show you do have the ability to turn on field level security. And I
want to apologize everyone for the little slow system. This is running on my local machine. This isn't on any of the Acumatica servers or any hosted servers, so my machine's just running a little slow with the screen share.
So if you go to tools in the upper right-hand corner, you can actually turn on audit history for those specific screens and see what they want to do. So I think that's the question that they were asking.
Oh, great.
So the answer is yes, that's what. So yeah, so you can turn on, so just to enhance this further, so you could actually turn on what people are doing within the system. If people make changes to sales orders or purchase orders or invoices or GL, anything you want in the system, you could turn that on for every screen in the system. It's part of our implementation process. So sorry about that. Yep, there you go. So. think that's all the questions that have come in. Great, good job there.
So I wanted to remind everyone to save the date for another webinar that we have coming up. It is going to be on July 30th at 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So please feel free to reach out if you want to get an invite to that, or we'll definitely send them out and write it in your calendar.
And that one will be on month-end processing, by the way. So for those accountants in the room, we'll be going over the month-end processes, what you should be doing on a month-end basis, what reports to tie out to, things like that.
Thanks again, everyone, for attending. Please feel free to reach out to us, me or Stuart, Stuart and I, if you have questions about the system. And really, if you haven't messed around with a test tenant in Acumatica, I highly suggest setting that up. It's really, really effective because you not only get to play around with stuff, you don't have kind of somebody feel like somebody's watching you over your back, make sure you don't make a mistake in it. And the only way to learn is to fail a little bit and to run into a mistake. And with obviously, like, that's not the goal here. We want to make sure we're giving the right guidance, so feel free to reach out. But if somebody was on their free time, wanted to watch a couple videos, we have some YouTube videos, Net at Work on our website. I've created a bunch of different trainings that I'll be adding to, like quick tip videos of how to do different functions through Acumatica. You can follow along and watch those on your test system. We'd love to help set that up with you and kind of get things rolling.
Great job, Jason, putting this together. We really appreciate that. And again, if there's anything you need, please feel free to reach out to us here at Net at Work. We're always available. Appreciate everyone's time. Appreciate everyone being a client, and really have a great rest of the week and safe weekend. Thank you again.
Bye, everyone.